generation is more liberal, more tolerant, more Democrat-leaning than the one before. It's not just because they're young.
For another point of view, it's Hard News with Russell Brown and Wammo on Kiwi.
Head honcho over at publicaddress.net, the Hard News blog, also the Media 7 show on TVNZ7. Russell Brown, good morning.
Good morning.
An entertaining week in the media this week, it's got to be said.
Has. It's been a busy week on the site, actually.
What in particular? Which issue?
Well, the first post about the Hobbit standoff raced to 500 comments and 20,000 page views, and I thought actually yesterday, on Monday, I thought I'd better put up another one, and that appears to be quite popular too.
Well, so you've really taken it on board to really give a comprehensive overview and an examination of really what is happening with the Hobbit.
Yeah, I've tried to, because I think people don't understand the issues all that well, and it is complex, and there are things, particularly the role of the US Screen Actors Guild, that I don't think are well understood here. Because I think what people don't quite grasp is that this was all kicked off by a letter last October from the Screen Actors Guild to the MEAA, which is the Australian union that essentially runs Actors Equity in New Zealand, reiterating its Global Rule 1, which is something that SAG did in 2002 because it was worried about so-called runaway productions, i.e. films being made outside America. And the key purpose of this, if you start to read up, is basically to stop films being made outside America by making everyone else adopt American pay and conditions for actors, which is good for actors, probably not so good for actually film industries anywhere but the US. And they've been quite frank about this, that this is what the idea of this rule is. And I kind of think that maybe the actors who've taken these votes do need to sit down and talk about their attitude towards adopting a provision whose key purpose is to stop films being made anywhere else. And I have to say that the more I learn about this, I think the actors do have a case. I think that I thought Simon Bennett, who's been posting on in the discussions, pointed out that actors in New Zealand do feel a bit powerless because they have this code of practice, the so-called Pink Book, which in general I think works pretty well, but is not enforceable. But the way they've gone about it, and in particular, I was disturbed by a Facebook post yesterday by a Wellington actor talking about the way that the Wellington actors meeting was conducted, which to me, if it's true, it's absolutely appalling. Yeah. At the Auckland meeting, non-union members, we're not quite sure how many members Equity has. The Auckland meeting, non-union members were welcome. All their votes were counted. In Wellington, they started to have a vote, and when people voted nay, they suddenly decided that maybe non-union members couldn't vote. So in the middle of this meeting, not having thought of it beforehand, they had to stop the motion vote and then debate in the middle of the meeting while these poor people who were going to vote no sat there feeling incredibly uncomfortable and were eventually told they couldn't vote. Someone else tried to stand up and read out the statement from Peter Jackson. The union said that statement was read out. It wasn't. The person who tried to read it out was shouted down by the time they got to the second page. This sort of behaviour this is not safe meeting protocol, and it does start to look like bullying.
Well, trust dramas to be injected into this by actors. I guess that's the...
Yeah. And like I said, I don't think they're without a case, but I think that they are being manipulated in this, and I think that they are not being well served by the likes of Simon Whipp, who's the Australian who talks to everyone but the New Zealand press, because they don't want to give the impression that an Australian has any role here at all.
Overall, do you think the project has like a bit of a sour feel to it?
Yeah, it's developing that way, and I understand there are genuine plans B, C, and D, and one of those is for the production go to to go to Australia, where one of the states, I'm not sure which one, has offered to double its usual tax break, its usual rebate for foreign films.
It could only be done in Tasmania. It can only be done in Tasmania.
Yeah, well, they don't really have very good mountains in Australia, do
No.
they? But, I mean, if that happened, I dread to think of the backlash.
Yeah.
It is a mess, and whatever you've heard about there being talks, unfortunately isn't true. Actors Equity has spoken to no one. The people they need to speak to, rather than trying to negotiate an industry agreement via Peter Jackson, which would be unethical of him to even enter into that process. He can't set the terms and conditions for every other producer in New Zealand because he can blow everyone out of the water. So Equity hasn't met with SPADA, which is the producers' organisation, and pretty much hasn't met with anyone. The only meeting that there's been across the divide has been Helen Kelly from the CTU, who met with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh. And I gather that was supposed to be confidential too, so people are terribly happy about that coming out. But it's hard to see what can happen if Equity plays this kind of brinksmanship game. Yeah, and what's happening is serious as well. I thought Chris Trotter wrote a ridiculous column in the press yesterday saying that there is no boycott. It was just expressions of fraternal support from other unions around the world. I've seen the document. It's a don't work order. It's a very rare and very extreme step, and it is a boycott. And unfortunately, it seems like the only person who can call it off is the Australian Simon Whipp, who we don't hear from. So it's just...
It all seems rather extraordinary. Also extraordinary that the government is getting involved in a mediating
I've got
role.
my doubts about whether it was a good idea for the government to get so obviously involved. Although it has been amusing seeing some people on the left decry the Crown Law opinion that Chris Finlayson presented in favour of a somewhat tenuous opinion from a big corporate law firm that the actors have got on their side. It is a Crown Law opinion, and it shouldn't be dismissed. There are legal obstacles to making a collective agreement with a group of independent contractors. It's a breach of the Commerce Act. It's like price fixing, basically. So unless you completely change the entire basis on which the New Zealand industry has worked for years and make actors employees rather than independent contractors, you can't really have a collective agreement in that sense, which is why the so-called Pink Book that the industry uses as a code of practice isn't actually a collective agreement. It's a set of guidelines. So I really can't quite see where it goes from here, to be honest. I'm quite worried. I think there's a distinct chance that we lose the Hobbit.
Crikey. Hopefully. Well, maybe, it is the poison chalice.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, maybe it's cursed.
It's got that River Queen feel about it.
Yes.
To me. Thank goodness, Russell, you've talked long enough that we don't have to talk about the other massive weasel-shaped elephant in the room, being Henry, and we'll leave it at that.
Indeed.
Thanks very much, Russell.
Righto.
For a full examination of The Hobbit, you go along to publicaddress.net and check out the posts there as well.